Hello, my name is Ainsley Halden, and 2 weeks ago, at the Christmas party I hosted in the house I bought, designed, and restored with my own hands, my parents stood in front of everyone and announced they were giving it to my brother. No warning, no conversation, just a smile and a sentence, like I was some tenant being evicted from my own history. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing they'd been planning it for months. Forging documents, changing locks, selling off my name behind my back. And yet, they expected me to stay quiet. Would you? What happens when your own family decides your life belongs to someone else? And what would you do if they erased you from everything you built? And smiled while doing it? Christmas Eve has always carried its own scent here in Charleston. Pine needles, cinnamon, and the faint briny breath of the harbor rolling in from the marshes. That night, the glow from my mansion's windows spilled across the lawn like warm honey. I'd spent 3 years restoring this house brick by brick, paint stroke by paint stroke, until it felt like an extension of my heartbeat. Every banister, every antique door frame had my fingerprints on it. I was standing in the foyer when the first cars pulled up the long drive. Their headlights swept across the columns, making them gleam. Inside, the caterers I'd hired were setting out trays of miniature crab cakes, shrimp cocktail, pecan pies, the staples of a Southern Christmas spread. I'd planned the menu myself, but as soon as Callista walked in with her bright red dress and practiced smile, she started pointing at servers, rearranging plates like it was her job. Seth followed behind her, his palm on her lower back, grinning as if he owned the place. From the top of the stairs, I watched them for a moment. My brother, my older brother, always had a way of stepping into a room and making it about him. "You've outdone yourself," he said loudly to a group of our cousins, sweeping his hand toward the chandeliers. "This house is a real jewel, isn't it?" He didn't mention my name, didn't say a word about who paid for every inch of it. I descended the staircase slowly, smiling at guests, touching their arms, murmuring, "Merry Christmas," like I was floating above it all. But inside, I was already tightening, a coil ready to snap. As the evening went on, Callista moved seamlessly from room to room, greeting people, adjusting their drinks, nodding at the band. It was the kind of choreography she was born to do. I saw her whisper something to a server, then tilt her head toward me with a sympathetic smile. She was playing hostess, and no one even blinked. I wandered toward the library to get a moment to myself, but as I passed the drawing room, I heard Seth's voice. I stopped, hidden by the doorframe. "This is going to be our future nursery," he was telling an old college friend, his voice carrying that easy arrogance he wore like cologne. "We'll probably knock down that wall and put a crib right over there." My stomach flipped. I stepped into the room. "Excuse me?" He looked at me as if I'd just interrupted a casual conversation about the weather. "Relax, Ainsley," he said. "It's family. We're all part of this legacy. You don't have to be so territorial." "Territorial?" My voice stayed low but firm. "This is my house. You're giving people tours like it's yours." He smiled, the way someone smiles when they're already 2 moves ahead in a game you didn't know you were playing. "We'll talk later. Just enjoy the night." I walked out before my temper could climb any higher. My heels clicked against the hardwood floors I had refinished myself, echoing back like a warning. In the dining room, Callista was already standing at the head of the table, correcting a server about the wine pour, laughing in her bright, honeyed tone. "Oh, don't worry, sweetie," she told the waiter. "We'll just do it this way, family style." She raised her glass. "To family love." Everyone clinked their glasses. Some even looked at me like I was part of the staff. My inner voice whispered, "It's my name on every blueprint. My money, my sweat. But tonight, I'm just a guest renting space at their party." The music softened and then stopped altogether as my father tapped his glass. He stood at the center of the room, a man who used to fill doorways but now seemed smaller, his hair grayer, but his voice still booming. "Your mother and I have something to say," he announced. "We've been thinking about the future of this family, about stability, legacy." He glanced at Seth, then at me. "We've decided this house will belong to Seth and Callista now." There was a small gasp from someone at the table, but it was swallowed quickly by a murmur of approval. My mother, Meredith, nodded, her pearl earrings swaying. It's best for the family, she said. The children need stability. Ainsley, you're doing just fine on your own. You don't need a place this big. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd misheard them. But then the clapping began. Polite, restrained applause from aunts and uncles and cousins who had never lifted a finger to help me renovate a thing. My vision blurred for a second. I could see Seth smirk, Callista's delicate hand on his arm, as though she'd just been crowned. I forced my lips into a half-smile. I heard my own voice in my head. This isn't happening. Not again. They don't get to erase me from my own story. I excused myself before my face betrayed me. If you'll excuse me for a moment, I said, and walked toward the staircase, each step heavier than the last. Upstairs, the hallways were quiet. The paint I'd chosen, a soft dove gray, reflected the light in a way that always calmed me. Not tonight. I stopped in front of the antique mirror I'd rescued from my grandmother's attic. My reflection stared back, steady, unsmiling. They didn't just take walls and rooms, I thought. They're trying to take my name from this place. I didn't cry. My pulse was steady, my mind already turning over possibilities. There would be no shouting match tonight, no scene to confirm their story of me as emotional or ungrateful. I would let them clap, let them drink my wine, let them feel victorious. Downstairs, a cheer went up from the band starting another Christmas standard. I smoothed my dress, inhaled once, and walked back down into the glow of the party. I found my brother across the room, his face flushed with the thrill of winning something he hadn't earned. Inside my head, a single sentence formed, cool and sharp as glass. Let them clap. They don't know what's coming. I drove back to my townhouse after the Christmas Eve party without turning on the radio. The silence inside the car was louder than any carol could have been. Streetlights stretched across the windshield like white scars as I turned into my driveway. When I walked into the kitchen, the smell of rosemary and roasted meat still clung to my coat, remnants of the feast I had paid for, planned and served. My heels clicked against the tile, echoing off stainless steel and marble. The catering trays I had ordered were stacked neatly on the counter, food still untouched from the party, returned as though none of it belonged to me either. I set my purse down, opened the fridge, and stared at a bottle of sparkling cider I'd been saving. My own house felt like someone else's leftovers. I whispered to no one. I threw the party. I paid for the food. I designed that home. Yet, I was the only one who wasn't invited into the conversation. I walked to the living room and sat down on the couch, but my mind didn't stay in the present. It drifted back 6 weeks, to early November, to the first hint that something was being decided without me. I remember opening my phone one morning while waiting for my coffee to brew. A family group text that usually pinged with holiday plans had gone silent, but there was another thread, one I wasn't on. I found out because a cousin forwarded me a blurry screenshot by mistake. The subject, estate planning, stability for the future. In the screenshot, Seth was writing, I'll present the plan on Thursday. Mom and Dad will see it makes sense. We're ready for this step. I called my mother right away. What plan? I asked. Oh, just the usual check-in, she said, her voice soft but tight. Nothing serious. Don't worry about it, darling. Weeks later, over coffee, that same cousin, half apologetic, half gossiping, let slip that the presentation had been held in the dining room of my mansion while I was away on a work trip to Savannah. Seth had apparently laid out a PowerPoint explaining why he and Callista needed to inherit the house for the sake of family stability and future children. I listened without blinking, stirring my coffee until the spoon clinked. That was the first punch I swallowed. I had been written out of my own future in a room I'd built. Back in the present, I stood up from the couch and walked into my office. The desk lamp cast a yellow glow across piles of invoices and fabric swatches, reminders of the life I'd built piece by piece. I traced my finger along a blueprint rolled up in the corner. 3 days before the Christmas party, another small humiliation had arrived. I'd logged into my email to check RSVPs and found a polished invitation sitting in my inbox. It was the same invitation my guests had received, but it wasn't from me. The digital card read, Christmas Eve at the Wilson residence, hosted by Seth and Callista Wilson. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe Callista had sent it on my behalf. But when I opened the RSVP email, the header confirmed it. Hosted by the Wilson family. I called my mother again. Why would Callista send out the invitations? This is my house, my event. She just has more time, sweetheart, Meredith replied like a script she'd rehearsed. You're always so busy. I asked, did you correct anyone? Do they even know it's my house? She exhaled. It's all family, Ainsley. What difference does it make who sends it? I hung up, my hand shaking, but my voice calm. On the night of the party, no one corrected the guests when they assumed Callista was the hostess. Even the bandleader called her Mrs. Wilson with a nod of respect, while I stood 5 feet away, invisible. Walking through the guest room now, I noticed the bed still rumpled from a relative who had overstayed at Thanksgiving. That room had once been mine as a girl, painted soft pink. The place I'd learned to disappear quietly when adults argued. Always the one told to adjust. Always the one told, you're strong, you'll be fine. But I wasn't fine anymore, and I wasn't going to be invisible again. I moved back into my office and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen lit up the room like a small stage. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I began pulling up old emails, receipts, titles, contracts, everything that tied my name to that house. I saw one subject line from a year ago, Final Blueprint Approval. Halden Residence. My name, not theirs. A calmness settled over me, not relief, but precision. They thought they'd taken everything, but the paper trail still spoke. I created a new folder on my desktop and named it, letter by letter. Proof, this is mine. Then I sat back and allowed a small, deliberate smile to form. Not joy, not even anger. Just the satisfaction of laying the first brick of resistance. I didn't wait for a reply to the email I sent my father. Honestly, I didn't expect one. People like him, people who build control around silence, don't respond to threats. They freeze, stall, and shift the blame later. But I wasn't sending that message for a response. I sent it to mark a line. The next morning, I sat at my desk with a mug of bitter coffee, one sugar cube dissolving slowly, and opened the folder on my laptop titled, Proof, This Is Mine. I stared at it for a moment, my cursor hovering. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence? Silence was just the inhale before the storm. I clicked open the PDF labeled, Deed, Original. It was the purchase agreement from 5 years ago. My name, my signature, my mortgage, my closing date. I remembered every detail of that terrifying but electric afternoon at the closing table. I then opened the most recent property tax document. It had come in the mail 2 weeks prior. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now, as I scanned the second page, something strange jumped out. There was a new line under Registered Owner. Ainsley Halden, Seth Halden, Joint Co-holder. My stomach flipped. I blinked, thinking it was a clerical error. But the longer I stared at it, the colder I felt. I grabbed my phone and dialed the Charleston County Property Office. A young-sounding man answered. I need to confirm a recent amendment to my deed, I said, holding the document in front of me. Sure, ma'am. What's the property address? I gave it. He clicked a few keys. Then he said, yes, looks like an amendment was filed just under 3 months ago. You didn't submit that? No, I didn't, I said flatly. Well, there's a signed co-holdership edition for a Seth Halden. We have the scanned copy here. Looks like it's got your digital signature on it, too. My chest felt tight. Can you email me a copy? Sure, I'll send it right over. 5 minutes later, the document landed in my inbox. It looked almost identical to the original, except for one glaring change, a forged signature that looked like mine but wasn't. The pen strokes were too perfect. My real signature had a tiny skip in the Y of Ainsley, a habit I'd never broken. This version was smooth, like it had been copied from an old file. I sat back, the paper in my hands trembling, but my voice, when I spoke out loud to the empty room, came out steel-edged. They forged my signature. They added his name. They're trying to legalize the lie. I closed the document and opened my company's cloud archive. I pulled every single permit, renovation contract, and design invoice tied to the property. Every bill was in my name, every inspection signed by me. I downloaded them all into a new folder and labeled it Halden versus Halden. I took a break only to stretch my legs and reheat the coffee. As I passed the living room, I noticed my phone lighting up on the coffee table. A notification from social media blinked. @Callista Wilson posted a new video, Our Dream Home Reveal. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered. I shouldn't have clicked, but I did. The screen opened to a glossy video. Callista's voice rang out immediately, cheerful and camera-ready. "Hey friends, we're finally ready to give you a tour of our new place, the Wilson Estate." The video panned across my foyer. My fireplace. She pointed to the stonework I had chosen with painstaking care. This was such a special design choice. Seth really wanted a cozy, natural feel here, and I just loved it. I sat down slowly. Her narration continued. She opened the pantry. We were super picky about the cabinetry, and Seth actually picked out this granite. The comments section was flooded with heart emojis and praise. Power couple. That kitchen is a dream. You two deserve the world. My jaw clenched. My fingers curled into my palm until the nail beds went white. They hadn't just taken the house. They were rewriting the story. And worse, people were applauding. I watched it 3 times, not because I couldn't believe it, but because I needed to burn it into memory. I needed every lie on record. Then I deleted all access to the house Wi-Fi from my devices, changed passwords, disconnected any shared cloud storage Callista might have weaseled her way into. They weren't just living in my house. They were trying to erase me from it. That night, I sat in the dark for a long time, the only light coming from the screen where her perfect smile was frozen mid-laugh. I whispered. I laid every tile. I chose every light fixture. I bled for this place. It wasn't just a house. It was the only place I had ever carved out for myself without asking anyone's permission. I closed the video and opened my email. No subject, no greeting. Just one sentence. If they keep claiming this house, I will make sure they lose more than just keys. I typed my father's address, clicked send, then leaned back, hands folded in my lap, heart steady, jaw set. They started this. They could smile for the cameras all they wanted, but the walls still remembered my name. When I hit send on that email, I sat still for a full minute, my fingers hovering above the keyboard, the cursor blinking back at me like it dared me to take the next step. But nothing came. No reply from my father. Not a single word. Not that I expected one. If I had written, "There's a fire," I doubt he would have picked up the phone. He and Silence had always been close friends, comfortable, reliable, and loyal only to those who knew how to weaponize it. 3 days passed. On the 4th morning, I pulled into the driveway of my own house, my mansion, still technically under my name, and saw a row of catering trucks parked out front. I stepped out of the car, heels clicking against the cobblestones, and entered through the side door leading into the butler's pantry. From the hallway, I heard Callista's voice float out like some oversweetened cocktail. No, those canapes go on the silver tray, not the gold, and the florals should be in the foyer by 5. I paused. It wasn't rage that hit me. It was clarity. They were going to act like nothing happened, like my threat meant nothing. So fine. Let's stop pretending I'm not a threat. I walked into the kitchen. Callista turned around with that same smug smile she wore like expensive perfume. "Oh, Ainsley, didn't know you'd be here so early. We've got a lot to finalize. The Christmas party's going to be stunning." I didn't reply. I just stared at her for a second too long, then walked past her to the hallway. She kept talking to the caterers. I didn't care to listen. Later that day, I drove to my firm's downtown office. Nadine was out in court, but my assistant, Erin, greeted me with a cheerful, "Hey, need anything?" "Yes, I need a copy of the final renovation contract for the Halden property, the kitchen remodel in particular." She blinked, then tapped on her keyboard. "The kitchen? Didn't you say Seth was the project lead for that phase?" I stopped mid-step. "I said what?" Erin glanced at me, uneasy. "That's what's on file. Want me to pull it?" "Yes. Print every version. Now." 10 minutes later, I stood over the printer tray flipping through papers. There it was, clear as daylight, a revised version of the kitchen remodeling contract. Seth's name was listed as project lead, and below it, my digital signature. Except, I never signed that. I stared at the signature. It looked convincing, down to the looping flourish in my A. But something was off. The timestamp was during a trip I took to Nashville. I grabbed the whole file and stormed back into my office, scanning everything again. Seth and Callista had altered the contract. They'd used someone inside the construction company, probably that guy Callista dated in college, to slide through the changes. It was fraud, and it was going to cost them. That evening, I returned to the house. I waited until the last vendor left before walking out back, where Seth stood near the patio, drink in hand, looking out over the garden like he'd just acquired land in Europe. I approached calmly. No yelling. I didn't need volume. I had facts. He didn't turn when he heard me. "You get my text?" he asked, like we were catching up on dinner plans. "I got the contract," I said instead. "The one you had forged. Your name as project lead. My digital signature? That was sloppy." He chuckled. "Don't start swinging, Ainsley. You'll only hurt yourself." "Keep playing this game," I said, voice low, "and I'll stop using words." He turned then, eyes glinting with the same arrogance he had worn since we were kids. "You don't scare me, sis. You never did." I stepped closer. "That's because I never had to, but I'm done being the quiet one." He didn't respond. He just took a sip of his drink and looked away like he had somewhere better to be. I walked back inside. My pulse wasn't racing. I didn't shake. What I felt now wasn't anger. It was purpose. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A family friend had sent me an early digital proof of the Halden Family Legacy booklet being printed for the Christmas party. Out of curiosity, or maybe masochism, I opened it. And there was a page on Seth, his real estate achievements, his deep investment in restoring the family home. Callista had an entire section with a flattering photo in front of my fireplace. Then I found my name. One line, no picture, no mention of the renovations, no credit for the architectural design. Just Ainsley Halden, daughter, architect, currently residing elsewhere. My hands went cold. Not owner, not visionary, just currently residing elsewhere. I closed the file and walked into my studio. The only place they hadn't touched. I stood in front of the frosted glass door that read Halden Companies in gold leaf. I whispered, "If I don't draw the line now, they'll bury me in footnotes forever." My hand went to the drawer where I kept Nadine's card. I didn't even hesitate. I pulled it out, picked up my phone, and took a picture of the forged signature. Then I drafted a group text. To my father, to Seth, to Callista. No pleasantries, just a declaration. "This isn't your home. It's a crime scene. I'll see you all at the Christmas party. With proof." After I sent that group text, the house felt heavier, as though the walls themselves had inhaled and were waiting for the exhale. All night, my phone stayed silent. No response from my father. None from Seth. Not even a faux-friendly emoji from Callista. That silence wasn't an oversight. It was a message. The next evening, after a long day at the firm finalizing a bid for a new restaurant project, I drove back toward the mansion. The December sky over Charleston had that steel gray color that makes every streetlight glow like amber. My knuckles were tight on the steering wheel as I turned down the familiar tree-lined drive. I pressed the garage door opener and watched the panel lift halfway before stopping. Odd. I parked, stepped out, and went to the front door. When I slid my key into the lock, it jammed. I tried again. Nothing. I stood there, key in hand, heart dropping. They answered me loud and clear, I thought. They locked me out of my own life. I knocked once, twice, then harder. A few seconds later, Maria, the housekeeper, opened the door, eyes wide. "Ms. Ainsley, I didn't know you were coming back tonight." "I live here," I said, stepping inside. "Oh, they must have changed the locks earlier. Didn't you get the memo?" she asked nervously, clutching her apron. Before I could answer, Callista appeared at the end of the hall in a silk robe, a wineglass dangling from her hand like a prop. "Ainsley," she said smoothly. "What a surprise." I walked past Maria into the foyer. The air smelled different, Callista's perfume, something sugary and expensive, mixed with new candles. My favorite rug was gone. A mirror had been moved. Even the umbrella stand had been replaced. I kept my voice calm. You changed the locks. Callista sipped her wine. Oh, that. Seth thought it would be safer for the kids. You know how it is. No big deal. This is your final notice, I said quietly but firmly. If I find one more thing touched without my consent, I won't call a lawyer. I'll call the cops. Callista's laugh was light, but cutting. You're always so dramatic, Ainsley. No wonder no one wants to live with you. I stared at her. This isn't a joke. She tilted her head. Then maybe you should lighten up before you hurt yourself. I didn't bother replying. I walked past her into the hallway that led to the fireplace. That's when I stopped. On that wall, for 5 years, hung a photo of me and my mother, the day I opened the firm. Her arm was around my shoulders, and I was holding the first set of keys to the house. It was the one thing in the entire mansion that felt like her approval, her pride. Now it was gone. In its place hung a gold-framed portrait of Seth, Callista, and their children, all dressed in coordinated navy and cream, the kind of picture you see in lifestyle magazines. I opened the nearby drawer. There, under a stack of takeout menus, was my mother's photo, frame cracked, one corner of the picture scratched. I picked it up, fingers trembling but face unreadable. They didn't just change the locks, I thought. They erased the only person who ever believed in me. I sank to the floor, the photo in my lap. My breath shook for a moment, then steadied. This wasn't going to end with me crying on tile. I pulled out my phone. Nadine's contact glowed on the screen. My thumb hovered, then pressed. It's time, I whispered. I opened the secure app Nadine had sent me weeks ago, a digital form already half completed. Notice of intent to sue appeared at the top. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I doubted myself, but because I understood what crossing this line meant. Once I filed, there would be no turning back to Sunday dinners and polite pretense. Then I signed my name with my fingertip. Hit submit. Let's see how confident they are, I said out loud, when I show up with the law. By morning, I had no doubt. I opened my email around 6:30, still in my robe, cup of black coffee steaming beside me on the kitchen island of my rental. The confirmation was there. Your notice of intent to sue has been filed successfully. I sat there staring at those words, quiet and calm, not the kind of calm you feel when you win, but the kind that settles in right before a storm breaks. I hadn't even had a chance to close the tab when Erin, my assistant at the firm, called. Her voice was rushed. You might want to see this. It's bad. Forward it, I said. A few seconds later, a thread of emails landed in my inbox. It was a reply from one of our longtime commercial real estate clients. The message was short. Thanks, Ainsley. Surprised to hear you're putting the mansion on the private market. Let me know the asking price. We'd love to be first in line. I blinked. I hadn't emailed anyone about selling the house. I opened the original email the client had responded to. The message looked legitimate. My firm's logo, my signature block, even a well-formatted message explaining that I was exploring personal transitions and looking to quietly offload the Halden property for the right buyer. At the bottom, a Gmail address I'd never used, buried under layers of white text and a redirect domain. Then it hit me. Callista. She hadn't just pretended to host a party in my name. She'd forged my email, created a nearly perfect copy of my communication style, and reached out to clients under my name to try to sell my house behind my back. They weren't waiting for the party, I muttered, heart pounding. They were already halfway out the door with the deed. Within 20 minutes, I had forwarded the whole chain to Nadine. She didn't hesitate. I'll file a cease and desist immediately, she replied. You need to get in front of this. By the time I got to the office, our legal team had suspended all transactions related to my property. Erin had already flagged my accounts with a lock, requiring two-step verification for any change. Nadine called the county clerk herself and opened a fraud alert, tying the pending lawsuit to a property fraud inquiry. It wasn't just about civil court anymore. This was approaching criminal grounds. The walls were starting to close in on Seth and Callista. They just didn't know it yet. That night, I drove back to the mansion. I needed one more thing, something that had been sitting in the back of my mind for weeks. My mother's closet. It hadn't been touched since the funeral. My father had refused to box anything up. The door was always shut, like a museum no one dared disturb. I turned the knob slowly and stepped inside. Her scent lingered faintly, lavender, old perfume, a whisper of something warm. I walked past the rows of shoes and cardigans toward the back wall where a wooden jewelry box sat under a lace cloth. I lifted the lid. There were earrings, a brooch she wore to church, and behind the inner panel, something I had almost forgotten, a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in her handwriting, Ainsley. But as I stared closer, something felt wrong. The letters were just slightly off. The cursive looked practiced, not natural. My mother's handwriting had a kind of rhythm to it, always a little rushed, a little inconsistent. This was too neat. I opened it carefully. To Ainsley, it began. The only one who built her future, not borrowed it. This home is yours. The words were loving, powerful, but also suspiciously generic. Too clean, too edited. I drove the letter to Nadine first thing the next morning. She didn't even need a handwriting analyst to confirm what we both already knew. This was tampered with, she said. Parts were traced. I can submit it as evidence, but we'll need to include the original scan for context. They tried to rewrite her words, I said quietly, just like they tried to rewrite mine. By noon, I was back in my study. The sun through the tall windows made patterns on the hardwood floor as I laid out 2 copies of the letter, the tampered one and the digitized original we'd found in an old estate file Nadine had dug up. The differences were subtle, but undeniable. One letter made it sound like a general blessing. The other was a clear, direct gift. I slipped both copies into a plastic evidence sleeve, labeling it in black ink. The final proof. I didn't cry. That part of me had dried up. What replaced it wasn't anger anymore. It was conviction. Cold, clear, and ready. I went to my closet and took out the navy blue suit I hadn't worn since my mother's funeral. Pressed, tailored, sharp. The party was tomorrow. I sat down at my vanity and began rehearsing in the mirror. Not my lines, my tone, my stance. I would need to say only a few words, but they had to cut like glass. They wrote me out of my own story, I said softly, watching my reflection. Tomorrow, I write the ending. By the time I stepped out of the car, the last of the sunset had vanished behind the Rockies. Darkness had settled in like a secret, wrapping the house in soft shadows. The driveway glistened under the glow of warm string lights Seth had installed a week earlier, meant to feel romantic, festive, timeless. The lights wove through the limbs of the old oak trees like a Pinterest wedding board come to life, and yet all I could see were illusions draped in convenience. From the backyard came the familiar clink of glass and the hum of voices, cocktail laughter from people who remembered me only when it benefited them. A saxophone carried smooth jazz through the cold air, a carefully curated soundtrack to suggest class without too much effort, the kind of music people choose when they want to impress but not offend. I stood at the base of the front steps, heels firm on the stone. My black tailored suit was sharp, intentional, hair pulled back into a tight twist, no jewelry, no pretense, just the leather-bound binder in my hand, the one I'd spent weeks assembling. Tonight wasn't a party, not for me. I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to read a verdict. They had no idea what was coming. But I was done waiting for someone else to speak the truth. I pushed open the front door. The foyer buzzed with acquaintances I hadn't seen in years, neighbors who smiled with too many teeth. Cousins who suddenly remembered my name when they saw me dressed like I belonged in a boardroom. I passed by trays of champagne flutes and declined each one. I didn't need bubbles. I needed clarity. I made my way toward the ballroom, the noise swelling with each step, voices, laughter, and a kind of invisible theater of ease. Just as I turned the corner, I felt a light tap on my arm. I turned. Eli, our family's gardener of almost 15 years. He had more claim to the land than half the people sipping cocktails inside. His eyes searched mine. hesitant but determined. "I know I'm not supposed to get involved," he said softly, "but I can't keep quiet anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "Go on." He glanced over his shoulder before stepping closer, voice lowered. "About a month ago, Seth had someone come by, an appraiser. I overheard him telling the guy you'd already signed over the house. He said it was a done deal, but something about it felt wrong. So I recorded it." He reached into his coat and handed me an old phone. On the screen, an audio file. I didn't even need to hear it. My body recognized the betrayal before my ears could catch up. I slid the phone into my purse. "Thank you, Eli. You did the right thing." He nodded. "Some people forget whose name is carved into the foundation." Inside the ballroom, the chandelier sparkled above Callista like a crown. She stood at the center of it all, her velvet green dress catching the light, voice polished with that faux warmth she used whenever attention pointed her way. "We are so grateful for the Halden family," she said, glass raised. "This house has been a labor of love, and we're honored to carry its legacy forward." My father stood beside her, rigid in his tux, nodding with restrained pride. Gareth, smug as ever, lifted his drink. "To family," he said, "to the next generation." I stepped forward. "Actually," I said, calm but firm, "I'd like to clarify something before the night ends." The music faltered. Conversations trailed off. Heads turned. Seth froze. Meredith blinked. Callista's smile began to wilt. I moved to the center of the room, slowly, deliberately, then pulled the leather binder from my purse and held it with both hands, reverently, like scripture. "This," I began, "is a complete and legally verified record of everything tied to this house. The original deed with my name, every renovation invoice I signed, tax records, the fraudulent contract Seth created to sneak his name in, the email Callista sent pretending to be me in an attempt to sell the property, and an audio file provided by a credible witness confirming Seth's meeting with an appraiser about a sale I never approved." Callista inhaled sharply. Seth looked for an exit. My father frowned. "This isn't just a file," I said. "It's a reckoning." Nobody moved. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim. "This is about theft, not just of property, but of trust, of legacy, of voice, of presence. This is a correction." Callista stepped forward. "Ainsley, maybe we should talk privately." I met her gaze. "You can explain it to your lawyer." The color drained from Seth's face. His hands trembled. He clutched his drink like it might keep him from disappearing. My father reached for the binder, flipping through the first few pages. The fake contracts, the bank transfers, the time-stamped emails. He didn't speak, but I saw his jaw clench, like he was bracing for a storm he knew he helped create. Meredith stood a few feet behind him, expression unreadable. She didn't reach for me, she didn't defend them, she simply watched, like someone seeing the scaffolding fall off a building they'd always thought was solid. Voices stirred around us. "Wait, is she suing them?" "I thought the house was hers." "I heard something about forged papers." Glasses clinked too loudly. The jazz had stopped. Callista tugged at Seth's arm. "We need to go." But I wasn't done. I turned to my father, looked him in the eye. "You knew." "Maybe not all of it, but enough, and you stayed silent." He stared back, but something had collapsed inside him. "To everyone here," I said, raising my voice just enough, "tonight wasn't a celebration. It was camouflage, a staged scene to sell a lie." I let the words settle. I didn't rush the silence. I let them erase me once. That won't happen again. I glanced around the room. This is no longer a party, it's the final curtain. The house emptied slowly, like air leaking from a balloon. After I laid the folder on the buffet table and said what needed to be said, no one rushed to defend them. There were no shouted arguments, no family loyalty leaping to Seth's rescue. Just murmurs, half-finished drinks left on side tables, and the quiet shuffling of coats being retrieved from the hall closet. I remember standing near the fireplace, my fireplace, as the last guest slipped out the front door. Seth and Callista had already disappeared, likely retreating to whatever borrowed reality they'd been living in. Meredith lingered for a moment in the corner, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Gareth was nowhere to be found. Not a word, not even a nod goodbye. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like something had finally cracked open, like a house that had been holding tension in its beams for far too long. Silence isn't peace. Sometimes, it's just the sound of a war ending. 2 weeks later, I sat in the Charleston County Courthouse, my name typed clean and formal on the plaintiff list, waiting for the judge to enter. The courtroom buzzed with quiet urgency, lawyers whispering, phones silenced, heels echoing against tile. I sat between Nadine and one of her firm's top litigation partners, wearing the same navy blue suit from the night of the party. My hands were folded neatly in my lap. My back was straight. Across the aisle, Seth looked like a man halfway through a hangover. Callista sat beside him, expression hollow, makeup sharp enough to suggest desperation. They didn't look at me, not once. The judge entered and called the room to order. We started with the basics: property ownership, timeline, document trail. Then came the exhibits, pages upon pages of evidence that spoke louder than I ever could. The forged contracts, the fake email, the altered letter from my mother, Eli's voice memo. Their defense? Weak, meandering. Seth mumbled something about misunderstandings and family decisions. Callista's lawyer tried to frame her actions as enthusiastic involvement, as though identity theft were just overzealous party planning. The judge wasn't buying it. After 90 minutes of hearing and just 10 more of deliberation, the verdict was clear. All legal ownership of the property known as 1245 Magnolia Avenue shall be returned solely to Ainsley Halden, the judge said, voice steady and unimpressed. Callista Wilson is found liable for fraudulent misrepresentation. A financial penalty of $85,000 is to be paid to the plaintiff. Additionally, Mr. Seth Halden's real estate license is hereby suspended pending further investigation into ethical misconduct. Nadine leaned over and whispered, "That's it. You won." But I didn't smile. I didn't fist pump or collapse into tears. I simply nodded, the way someone nods when something broken has finally been named aloud. Outside, reporters waited. I walked past them with my chin high and said only one thing into the cameras. "No comment. I just want what's mine to stay mine." Later that afternoon, back in my office, I opened the file I'd been reviewing since the day after the party, the sale agreement. I'd thought long and hard about it. People assumed I would keep the house, that I'd plant a flag in the lawn and live there until I died. But the truth was, I didn't need the house. I didn't even want it anymore. What I needed was to own my name, my legacy, my peace. I signed the papers. The mansion went on the market the next day, listed at market value, high 6 figures. Within 72 hours, offers came pouring in. But I didn't accept the highest bid. I accepted the one from a young black couple, both teachers, who had been turned down by 2 previous sellers for not being the right fit. I donated 10% of the proceeds to a nonprofit that helps women in estate disputes navigate the legal minefields of family betrayal. That part felt right. With what was left, I bought a small craftsman-style home just outside Charleston. It sat near the marsh, quiet and shaded, the kind of place where the loudest sound at night was the whisper of wind through the trees. "I didn't need to keep the house," I said to Nadine when we unpacked the last of the boxes. "I just needed to keep my name on what mattered." A week later, I framed my mother's original handwritten note, the real one. Not the edited version that had shown up in court, but the one Nadine found in the estate records. Her handwriting, rushed and imperfect as always, was like music to me. I didn't hang it in my new home. I put it in my office, right behind my desk. It was the last thing I looked at before client meetings and the first thing I saw every morning, a reminder that I had rebuilt everything from what was nearly stolen. Forgiveness is optional. Boundaries are permanent. One evening, as I was wrapping up paperwork, a new email pinged into my inbox. Subject line, "Can we talk?" From Meredith. I stared at it for a long moment. I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. I just closed the laptop. "Maybe one day," I whispered, "but not today." I didn't open Meredith's email, not because I feared what it might contain. I didn't need to read it to know what it would say. The subject line, "Can we talk?" landed in my inbox like a feather, soft and unassuming, but it carried the weight of years behind it. It lingered there, unread and untouched. Some messages aren't meant to be read. Some are designed only to haunt, to whisper just loud enough that you remember the person who sent them still thinks they have a say in your story. But that chapter had closed. The morning after, I woke up to the kind of sunlight that doesn't fight to be noticed. It simply arrives, warm and slow and sure. It slipped gently through my white cotton curtains, painting soft shadows on the polished floors. My new house didn't creak or groan like the old one. It didn't try to impress with vaulted ceilings or imported marble. It just existed. Calm, solid, honest. There were no chandeliers in this place. No dramatic staircases that looked like they belonged in someone else's version of luxury. Just clean windows, natural light, and a stove that made a little huffing noise when it turned on. The kettle on the stove whistled sharply because I'd forgotten it again. I didn't jump. I didn't rush. I moved through the morning with ease. Peace doesn't roar in like justice. It doesn't announce itself with applause. It arrives like a neighbor you never knew you needed. It brings a blanket and sits down in the corner, waiting for you to stop bracing. That day, I decided to tackle the last unopened box in the guest bedroom. The one I'd labeled Office, Miss, and then ignored for 3 straight weeks. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe I wasn't ready. Inside, mostly papers, a few office supplies, and wrapped in layers of tissue, a small silver picture frame. It was the photo of me and my mother, the one taken the day I opened the firm. We were outside the building, sun at our backs. She was wearing her Sunday pearls and that navy cardigan she always wore to church luncheons. Her arm was around me, and I remember that moment. I had never felt more capable, more rooted. In the picture, my smile looked like belief, hope, momentum. I carried the frame to the living room and set it on the mantel. The shelf was still mostly bare, intentional. I wanted to build the space slowly, to curate what stayed and what didn't. As I adjusted the frame, the back shifted under my fingers. Something rustled. Curious, I gently opened the backing. Tucked behind the photograph was a folded envelope. My pulse slowed. The air around me shifted. Her handwriting, uneven, familiar. Just my name on the front. Ainsley. No last name. No formal greeting. Just the way she always wrote it, like music only I could hear. With trembling hands, I opened it. If they ever try to take from you what you built, remember who watched you build it. I saw the late nights, the tears, the moments you wanted to quit but didn't. I'm proud of you. This home, whatever shape it takes, is your story. Not their possession, not their theater. Yours. Never forget that. Mom, I read it twice. Then again. Each word folded into my bones like steel. Each sentence stitched a seam that had been frayed for years. I gently placed the letter back behind the photo and sealed the frame. This time, I set it on the mantel, not as decoration, but as truth. No one could touch it now. No one could revise her words or adjust her meaning. She had spoken, and I had heard her. Later that week, the headlines began rolling in. They arrived first in whispers, then in bold print. Local influencer under fire for property fraud allegations. Seth Halden stripped of real estate license following court decision. Halden family controversy raises awareness of inheritance exploitation. The press wasn't cruel. It didn't have to be. The truth spoke loudly enough. Online, Callista's curated empire began to shrink. Followers dropped by the thousands. Endorsements vanished without a word. One by one, her dream home hashtags were deleted. Her account went private. Her links redirected. What had once been her brand, built on shiny kitchens and borrowed stories, evaporated. Seth's brokerage quietly removed his name from the etched glass window downtown. Where it once read Halden Property Group, it now said Charleston Realty Partners. No announcement, no press release. Just quiet rebranding. Quiet shame. No one reached out directly, Not really, except the messages. From strangers, from women I didn't know, from people who had read the story online or watched the courtroom coverage posted on advocacy forums. You did the right thing. Thank you for not letting them get away with it. You gave a lot of us hope we didn't know we needed. People like that rely on silence. You didn't stay silent. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt finished, and that was enough. Gareth never called. Not even a holiday card this time, his usual way of maintaining the illusion of involvement without risking real accountability. A performative gesture I no longer missed. Meredith's email sat unread. I never deleted it, but I never responded either. I didn't block her. Not every bridge needs to be burned, but some should never be crossed again. What mattered now wasn't the family I'd come from. It was the life I was building beyond them. In February, I received an invitation to speak at a women's leadership conference in Savannah. The topic, resilience in business. I hesitated. The idea of turning my private wreckage into public inspiration felt complicated. But I went. And when I stepped on stage and looked out at a room full of women, some in tailored suits, others in scrubs or work boots or quiet defiance, I understood something. This story was no longer just mine. I didn't name names. I didn't describe legal documents or family dinners that had turned into courtrooms. I didn't drag anyone. I didn't have to. I simply said, sometimes the people who raise you will try to rewrite your story, but you can take the pen back. The room rose to its feet. I didn't cry. I just stood there, still, rooted, whole. That night, back home, I lit a single candle, set it beside the frame on the mantel, the letters still safe inside. I poured tea, took off my shoes. Let silence settle like a companion, not an enemy. Then I whispered into the soft quiet, we're home now. And for the first time in a long time, it felt true. Sometimes the people who claim to love us the most are the very ones who draw the sharpest lines through our identity. But healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. It often begins with choosing yourself, even when no one else does. Have you ever been erased by your own family and had to rebuild everything from scratch? Share your story in the comments. We read everyone. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of strength, survival, and silent revenge. Your next favorite story might be the one we tell tomorrow.